And we're here with Conor Ryan. Conor, what is up?
Evan, doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. And the Bruins coming up on a weird time with the Bruins because they have a game Monday night in Columbus, and Tuesday night they're in Detroit. So obviously the we will not be talking about the Columbus game on Monday, maybe the Columbus game on Saturday, which was a great atmosphere, and Nick Foligno's 1,000th, or was it 1,000th or 1,500th celebration? 1,000th, right?
1,000th, yeah.
1,000th. And he got some wine, and we got some good gifts. But again, he didn't get the Chara plane ticket anywhere.
That is true. He didn't get that, but I like the painting they had of him, where it documented every step along the way of him in his NHL career. So it had like Ottawa. It had Columbus, obviously. It had the Bruins. It just didn't have the Maple Leafs. It was like a Stalinization. They just wiped that out. Like, no one remembers this. No, we got that out of there. So good job.
It didn't happen. That didn't happen at all. But yes, we'll not be discussing the game on Monday night. But there are bigger things to discuss, and there's stuff that's become trends over the past week or so. Obviously, we talked a lot about the Toronto loss on Poke the Bear, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time with that. I mean, we'll glaze over it a bit. But since then, there was the 8-1 drubbing of New Jersey. There was the 5-2 win over Columbus on Saturday. So two solid wins. And one thing that I'm starting to see more and more, and this was kind of the X factor we said after the deadline, where this is the one part of the top nine where things could go haywire. And that is Jake DeBrusk on the top line. And over the past bunch of games, you're starting to see him get it, right? Like, obviously the goals were coming here and there for him, but the chemistry is looking right with Marchand and Bergeron. And you see on some of these goals, right, some of the passes he's making. I know it's New Jersey and Columbus, and these teams are not playoff teams, but it's encouraging to see him, without even really looking, know Marchand is where he is, or Bergeron's in the bumper, and he's completing these passes, and they're scoring goals. And is this kind of a sign that DeBrusk is starting to mesh with this top line, and not just short term, but something maybe long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially maybe just within the lens of this season, I think we don't have to really fret about the fact that there's any buy-in from him or anything like that. It seems like at this point, both parties know kind of what the next step is, which I still imagine he's probably going to get traded in the offseason. But for right now, he's clearly bought in. One, he's on the top line and he's producing, so that helps out a lot. And everyone's happy when that's the situation. But I also think you look at what I'm probably most encouraged about is, as you said, when they went on that kind of West Coast trip is when he first kind of started that scoring streak, and goals are goals, right? You'll take them any chance you get. But I think what you're seeing over the last couple of games, especially, it's not just the fact that he's, finding guys like Marchand and Bergeron. He's had a couple of really nice setups, especially, which is really encouraging to see. But I think you look at DeBrusk, his overall game and kind of just the eye test, it looks more like the DeBrusk we kind of saw from 2018, 2019, where it's a lot of first guy in. He had that one sequence where I think he buried, I think it was Smith.
Ty Smith.
Ty Smith. Yeah, he buried him on the forecheck. It creates a turnover, and then they bury a chance right after that. You're just seeing it. It's not like he's reinventing the wheel or doing anything drastic, but with his speed, his straight line speed, he's getting to pucks first. He's throwing his weight around a little bit, and again, he's not going to be Nick Ritchie out there, but I think anyone who saw him, especially during that, the first kind of stretch of his tenure here in Boston, where he was very assertive, willing to throw his weight around, you're seeing a lot of that more. And again, it's kind of the first gear in terms of what's leading to these successful offensive zone chances for this line, right? Where he's recovering pucks, forcing turnovers, creating havoc more or less. And you've got two great guys in Bergeron and Marchand who can capitalize off of those. So yeah, I think one, he's probably bought in with what the task is on that top line. I imagine, I think he even kind of talked about it, that even though maybe he's not playing somewhere else is what I think his end goal is, I think at this point he can kind of take a step back and kind of relax a little bit and know that, all right, we'll address this further down the line, but I'm here. I'm in a good spot. The team, the guys in the room still have my back. I still have theirs. So I think he's just playing simple straight line hockey. And when you've got two great guys, Marchand and Bergeron, on your line with you, the points are usually going to come. He
also just looks more engaged in general. I mean, you mentioned the forechecks and things, but even and this sounds kind of weird, but like his cellies are harder, right? Like he's actually like he's celebrating goals. And like there was that funny clip Nesson got of him on Saturday where he's kind of like running past the camera. And it's like, that was stuff he did all the time back in, 17, 18, 19. And again, these past couple of years for him, I think have been difficult, and he seemed less engaged, but now you're starting to see that kind of come to the forefront. And it's like, that's starting, it's working. And I think it's one of those things where, when you look at the things you worry about with this Bruins team, and there are things, right? We talk about it all the time. DeBrusk was always one of them. And I think he still might be, but it's more encouraging now that you're getting, production, the chemistry's there. He's engaged. He looks like he's bought. And you mentioned also like the contract too. Like he's got a more palatable deal that I think he knows in the future can be dealt better than the qualifying offer would have been dealt this summer. And it's funny, you look bigger picture at the lineup. And I was looking this morning, I was just kind of looking at the lines for Monday's game against the Blue Jackets. You got Marchand, Bergeron, DeBrusk, Hall, Pastrnak, Frederick Coyle, Smith, Foligno, Nosek, Lazar. And I said, that lineup's starting to look a lot like that lineup is becoming formed for game one of the playoffs. And game one is not for a little while here. It's funny that the NBA is starting way before the NHL. Feels like right now we should be starting the NHL playoffs, but those are the four lines. And I think I'm curious if you think there's any other spots lineup that might be up for grabs. Feels like the only spot in the four forward lines that might be up is Foligno and Bleed. That feels like the only thing I might tweak depending on matchups. I feel like Foligno is probably never going to be taken out of the lineup. You feel like this might be the four lines that they got for the playoffs?
Yeah, I agree. I think the only possible change I think would be on that fourth line. And again, I think those guys aren't interchangeable, but whether it's a guy like Bleed who can slot in if need be, and what you're going to get from Bleed in terms of straight line is going to hit everything that moves, going to piss off a lot of people on the ice. There's value in that. Even
Elaine when she was doing her video, he's going behind, smashing the glass. He's just he's
an agitator. Yeah,
he gets exactly on everybody's skin.
Yeah. You look at a guy like that, and again, it's the playoffs, so it's going to be a war of attrition. There's going to be guys who are banged up. So a guy like Bleed's, I think, inevitably going to slot into the lineup at some point, and there's value there. It's kind of the same as a guy like Clifton, right? Like he may not be your, set, six defenseman, but in a pinch, if you need him to slot in there, there's value in that. And I even think a guy like Marc McLaughlin, who I'm sure we're going to talk about in a second, he's a guy that if he, we talk a lot about that goal he had, which he like ripped, but also like you look at the rest of his game in terms of, being tenacious on the forecheck. There's value in that. If they think maybe he could slot into that fourth line role, maybe give a little bit more of a scoring punch, that's another guy that can slot in there. So I think the fourth line, you could see a pretty heavy rotation. It's kind of like the playoffs in 2019, where you had obviously Achari, Corrali, Wagner, and Nordstrom. Like you got four pretty solid guys there. Like it's a good problem to have if those guys can slot in and out. And inevitably, as it happens, you're probably gonna have to rely on all of them.
Yes. Oh, yes. And I was about to just get to McLaughlin in the sense that, he had a great debut, scores, incredible scene. His parents went nuts. And it was just such a cool thing to see a hometown kid come in and have that success that early on. But I also think, again, like you mentioned it, the fit, like he's a Bruin, like that dude is a Bruin through and through. And I think the way in which he plays, the tenaciousness, playing, on the right side of the puck and all those little things. And granted, it's one game. So again, like, the excitement of your first game can do a lot of crazy things. But I mean, even that goal, and he's a guy I think who can slot in on either of those bottom two lines. Like, I think if something happens to Craig Smith, or, Curtis Lazar is not performing the way you need him to, or, you want to just kind of mix and match. He's a guy who's big with size, who can skate well, who can go in on those bottom two lines. And, I also think McLaughlin kind of benefits from the sense that the expectations aren't super high with a guy like him, right? Like Ryan Donato had a lot of expectations. It was like, all right, this is a wonder kid. He's going to come in and do all these incredible things. I think a lot of times with these undrafted inside, well, Donato was drafted, but a lot of these college kids come in and you have these huge expectations for them. Like a guy like Torrey Krug had no expectations. He was signed out of Michigan State. He just came in and started dominating. I think with McLaughlin, I think McLaughlin's going to become the forward version of Torrey Krug? Probably not. But I do think you could get something legitimate out of him. And it might be hard for you to talk good about him because he went to BC, and that might be something you have to get over.
No one's perfect, Evan.
Nobody's perfect. Everyone says, he's living right at home. You can stay right at home in Boston. It's like, no, actually it's Chestnut Hill.
Newton.
It's Newton. But anyways, I digress. I have the same feelings you do about BC, so don't worry. I feel like UMass guy can have those same things. I mean, at least we don't claim. I get annoyed when people say like UMass Amherst or like someone recent with Bobby Trevino getting signed. People were saying, "Oh, UMass Amherst forward," and all the UMass people were like, "It's UMass or Massachusetts. No need for the Amherst," and they're right. I mean, that's not wrong.
Or if they say Amherst, right? You don't like
yes,
that.
That's one thing. There's no H in Amherst. It's just Amherst. You just rolls right off the tongue. But a guy like McLaughlin, I mean, is that a guy you could potentially see popping in the playoffs when needed?
Yeah, I think so.
Like a Tommy Wingles.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and again, it's kind of what I said earlier about guys just having value in that spot. You look at what McLaughlin can bring in terms of just his straight line two-way play. That's why he was one of the more coveted, college free agents. It's just that he's already got a pretty refined game that even if he's not maybe contributing on the scoreboard that much, he still has value there. It's almost kind of like a guy like Kuhlman, right? Where it's, maybe you don't know exactly what the offensive ceiling is yet, but he's going to give you a professional two-way game. And I think McLaughlin probably has a little bit more higher offensive ceiling than him because he's got a nasty shot. Like there's the goal, obviously, which was a rip, but I think he almost had a second goal there too, where he had another grade A chance where he fired. And I think it caught at that point, whatever goal he was in, I think was John Gillies. It kind of caught him off guard as well. So again, that's not to say that McLaughlin's going to be a 20, 25 goal scorer, but I think you look at kind of what the roles that the Bruins are looking for and their, string of success in terms of, building that depth. If we go a year or two down the road and you've got a bottom six core where you've got Coyle at 3C and Frederick there and McLaughlin and Johnny Beecher, which again, people will talk. I think it's a different case with Beecher because I think he's still got that first round pick, label over him. But if he becomes at the very least, let's say his floor is a souped up, meaner Sean Corrali, again, people will be like, well, why we get a first round pick for it? Still, there's a lot of good value in that. If he's a very, very good 4C, at the very least, that's his floor. You've got the makings of a very solid bottom six. Now, again, we'll see what happens 3 years from now when you have to look at your top six when Bergeron's not there. That's a bit of an issue. But in terms of just building that depth and, a guy like McLaughlin who could be a bottom six mainstay for a while, you didn't have to give up a draft pick for him, didn't have to shell out a big contract, all those things. That's how you, round out that depth and use your, network building or your local connections effectively in terms of finding that depth outside of the college, in the college realm, more or less.
The scenario for Marc McLaughlin, I was just thinking this as you were talking, was, Jake DeBrusk is going to get traded in the offseason. We're pretty much all certain that that's going to take place. And let's say you can't get a forward. Let's say in some weird way you can't secure a top six forward, whether it be Lysell isn't ready or free agency doesn't provide you it, or you can't make a trade or whatever it is, right? Let's say McLaughlin fits. Let's say McLaughlin actually makes an impact in the playoffs somehow or down the stretch, and suddenly you can put him on that third line and you could potentially move Craig Smith up to that top line, right? Craig Smith, again, is not stuck with Marchand and Bergeron, but hey, it takes time with a guy like Craig Smith. And you do wonder, in a worst case scenario, McLaughlin at least kind of could provide that where it's oh, you don't have to give up anything for this. You have it. It's in the system. Maybe that could work, right? And again, I don't think that's not people's favorite thing. I don't think that would get people excited. And I think there are bigger problems this offseason, down the middle. But I do think that's another option for you, if you really needed it. So going to be interesting to see if that kind of plays itself out. I still think they're during the offseason, again, this is stuff we'll get to a while away from now, but I do think during the offseason, they're going to get a top six winger or Lysell is going to pan out. They're going to figure something out with that top line right wing spot. But if it's, moving Smith up, moving McLaughlin in, who knows? In net, in net, one thing that has not been super unsteady this year has been in net with Ullmark and Swayman. Swayman, tough outing against Toronto last Tuesday, but rebounds nice against Columbus. The hugs have been the same. There's no, there's no anger in the hugs. It's like, oh, you're taking my job now, or anything.
No
but it seems like
aggressive.
No passive aggressive hugs. But I think it is good to see a guy like Swayman rebound because, again, I think come the playoff time, if he's the starter like we think he's going to be, he's going to have to rebound in some games. Did you like what you saw from a guy like from Swayman on Saturday?
I thought he was solid. He definitely got stronger as the game went on. It was rough out of the gate. I think he let up 2 goals on the first 6 shots, and they weren't like they were exactly ozone mastery from Columbus, right? I mean, he kind of wasn't able to glove that one puck, kind of skitters out, and they bury that one. And then the second one was, I think, like a rebound right in front, which has kind of been one of the more bigger flaws with Swayman's game so far, along with like handling the puck, which he still is kind of shaky on. So good to see him kind of tighten it up as the game went on. Still like to have him, work on some of those. And I think some of those issues you saw earlier on in the year with rebound or, handling the puck or things like that, starting to spread up a little bit again. But again, you look at kind of the situation here, and there could be many factors that build into it. It's whether it's, we're kind of getting to uncharted territory for Swayman in terms of his reps. Like this is, you hope that, you don't want to have a guy hitting a wall, especially leading into the playoffs. But this is why they went out and got a guy like Ullmark though, right? Like, and even though Ullmark's been steady, maybe not spectacular, but is a very, very solid backup guy. This is why you got him, right? Because whether it's, giving Swayman a little bit more rest down the stretch here, or, saving him for 1 or 2 of these maybe more primetime matchups. That's why you have a guy like Ullmark that can kind of be that safety blanket that can give him some time to rest and recuperate, because the last thing you want, this team could be rolling going to the playoffs, and you could become the 2021 Penguins, right? Where you look like a wagon and your goaltending just implodes. It's the last thing you want to have happen. So, definitely better than the Toronto game. That game, he just kind of, like the whole rest of the team, just seemed off. So it'll be interesting just how he handles it down the stretch here, especially when you look at the last couple of weeks of the season. They've got quite a few pretty daunting matchups on track. So if we go down that stretch and he's got like an 880 save percentage in those games, then you're like, oh, okay, that's not not great. Good. But just in terms of the amount of reps, though, it's good to have a guy like Ullmark there that can even make it a 50-50, 55-45 split, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Obviously, you had the Blue Jackets Monday night. You had the Red Wings. You're at Detroit on Tuesday. You're at Tampa on Friday. You're at Washington on Sunday. And then you have the Blues coming to town. Remember that team? Remember them? Oh, that's crazy. It's funny. I was just thinking, like, maybe was that the first time since Game 7, but it wasn't. The first time after Game 7 that they were back was early in that 19 season when Chara absolutely crushed. Was it Sammy Blais? Someone was going through middle ice, and it was
Sundqvist, right? Because it was after
Sundqvist.
He hit Grzelcyk. So.
It was, and they won 3-1 or 3. It was one of those games.
It was Bjork's got a goal. That was when the Blues Twitter account called him Andres
yes.
Bjork.
Andres Bjork.
That's the thing I remember from that game. But
yes,
that was a fantastic game too, because the entire lead up, obviously, the narrative was first time back, is it going to be a revenge game? Bruins no, it's not, and they just punched them in the face the entire game. Like that again. That was their first hit, but they were going after them.
If only they could have done that a few months before.
Alas, Evan.
Anyways, that's a very tough schedule coming up. Not easy. So I do think, and it gets me thinking about the playoffs. Right, we're already kind of discussing the playoffs a bit. And again, the standings will look different Tuesday when you're listening to this. Or they could look different. Maybe they won't, but they could. Right now, the Bruins would be slated. They are the 4th spot in the Atlantic, only 2 points behind both Toronto and Tampa. So right now, you would be the wild card spot, which is fine. I mean, you're right in the thick of it. You'd be playing Carolina if the playoffs started today. And I just kind of go back to, I don't love that matchup because that Carolina team looks good. And they're coached well. And it's not a team. I mean, again, this is different than the 19 Hurricanes or the 2020 Hurricanes, who you had no problem beating either time. This is a stronger team with better goaltending. And I just look at, and granted, they're not playing that. Like the playoffs don't start today, but I just look ahead to what that matchup could be. And I just feel like a matchup with the Hurricanes would just deflate, it just kind of deflates it like all the hype and all the great parts of the second half and the lead up and the good trade deadline. And then you got to play Carolina. Like, how do you feel about that Carolina matchup?
Not particularly thrilled. I mean, again, I think regardless of who the Bruins play, whether it's Carolina, Florida, Toronto, Tampa Bay, they're probably not the favorite in any of those matchups.
Correct.
And I think they can win any of those matchups too. It's going to be tough, but if you're looking at probably the easier path, and I'll say that now, knowing that full well, again, they're going to have an uphill climb, whichever way they go. You still probably feel better about that, either the 2 or 3 seed, and you play either Tampa, who again, they're legit, or Toronto, who smoked you the last couple times you play them, but we also know what their kind of flaw is as well. So I think out of like those 4 though, between Florida, Carolina, Tampa, and Toronto, I still think maybe Carolina is the most intimidating one, just in terms of, I think it's not just like the personnel they have, but I think it's just matchup wise. They've roasted you every single time with that forecheck they have there. And again, maybe it helps out that you have a guy like Lindholm, who's a bit of an equalizer there, but you look at just how opportunistic they are, how much they kind of give you fits with how aggressive they are on the forecheck. They got a very aggressive penalty kill, which if you look at the Bruins, when they've kind of hit a rut with their power play over the years or over this season, it's a lot of PK units that pressure you up high, that just drop you, don't let you get settled. And Carolina's like the original OG, like power kills, what they call it, right? Where they're just super aggressive. So that's a team that I think matchup wise is pretty daunting. And again, we can spin the pros and cons of any of these matchups. You can talk about Toronto, well, they've got an Achilles heel, but they've also kicked your ass the last couple of times. Tampa Bay, you've played them very well in the regular season, but they still, Vasilevsky can just go unconscious. And even if you're putting your best foot forward, sometimes it doesn't mean it doesn't matter that much, right? So whichever team they face is going to be difficult, but if I had to, you had to tell me which one team I'd rather avoid, I'd probably still go with Carolina.
100%. I'd rather play Florida over Carolina right now. I mean, again, nothing against Florida. I just don't again, there's not a lot of, I think when you have that playoff success, when you eventually have it comes after years of trudging through playoff series like Washington, and even the Bruins before 2011. You think of what all they went through. Florida hasn't gone through much as a good team, right? They've rebuilt, but they haven't had to go through many different playoff series and playoff grinds to get to where they are now, or to get to playoff success. With Toronto, man, Matthews looks good. And he's better defensively and stuff. And it's he's actually rounding into form. I actually will say, I was looking through, and I never do this because, especially getting to the Maple Leafs, because the comments are always toxic. But the YouTube comments, I think it was either the Poke the Bear we did or the Garden video we did. A Maple Leafs fan commented and said, "Hey, wanted to see what the other side was saying. I really enjoyed you guys." And I was like, "Huh."
Trap. It's a trap.
It's a trap. I was they're catching me while I'm off guard here. They're gonna attack when I kind of let them in. But yeah, Carolina is the one matchup that's the one that I would probably go against the Bruins the most. And because again, we've said this all year, Florida beatable, Toronto beatable, Tampa tough, but I think there is a route to beat them. Carolina feels like they're just a wagon, or a team that's meant to go further than the first round, and you maybe aren't when you're up against them. So again, a long time until the playoffs. It's less than a month, but still it's April and we're not at the playoffs yet. So only playoffs that are happening in Boston is the Frozen Four, but Thursday and Saturday. I think I'll be at both. You will be there Thursday, correct?
I will be there Thursday. This weekend I'll be down in DC. So
DC, yes. Heading to DC. You'll be at the Bruins on Sunday. So Frozen Four stuff going to be fun. Make sure to go to ncaa.com for all that stuff for me and all my musings and things I do. Maybe you'll see me on camera a few times, which is, big stuff. I got to make sure I look good. Anyways, Conor, where can the people see your stuff? What should they be looking forward to? The memes, the stories, all that stuff.
Yeah, in terms of the stories, all that stuff will be over at bostonsportsjournal.com. Again, as we kind of get to the home stretch here of the regular season, we'll have all this stuff. We roll it every day in terms of game reports, columns, previews, breakdowns, all that good stuff. Still working on a couple of features that we're excited to drop the next couple of weeks as we get closer and closer to the postseason. So all that stuff will be over at BSJ. So subscribe at bostonsportsjournal.com. Want to follow me on Twitter for the memes? You can follow me at ConorRyan_93.
Go do all that. For CLNS Media, I'm Evan Marinofsky. You Bruins beat listeners, have a great rest of your week.